every time we are opening a venture, we like to think that we have acquired a certain amount of knowledge of how to do it better.
When enough is enough, you just know it. And I was like, no more. I want out.
I actually never met a person that was so crazy that they wanted to go into an old psychiatric hospital and try to create a restaurant. It could only be a stupid person. Okay, that's going to be me.
Hello and welcome to The Recipe, a podcast about restaurants and the people behind them. I'm James Clasper, and this episode is all about fresh starts, new beginnings, and leaps of faith.
That step is a huge step. You stand on a cliff and you're scared. Will the parachute open if I jump?
That was the chef Beau Clugston talking about starting restaurants. And quite frankly, it's a pretty good metaphor. As the former Guardian restaurant critic John Lanchester once put it, the economics of setting up a new restaurant are scary in good times and terrifying in bad ones. So who on earth would open a restaurant right now? And why? Well, in this episode, we'll meet 4 people who have done just that, or at least are trying to. We'll hear from the former guitarist of a Japanese punk band who wound up in Oslo by way of Silicon Valley and has just launched her 14th culinary venture in 6 years. A cocktail aficionado who called time on his old bar right before the pandemic and reckons the time is right for his brand new concept. And a celebrated Danish chef who left his previous role last year after 13 years at the helm and has just launched his first restaurant. But first, we're heading to a cafe in the Copenhagen district of Nørrebro, where, on a recent morning, I caught up with Canadian chef Jonathan Tam. Born and raised in the blue-collar city of Edmonton, Tam set his sights early on a career in fine dining and, like so many young chefs, made his way to Copenhagen. In 2010, following an internship at Noma, he joined Christian Puglisi's brand new restaurant Relæ and was eventually appointed head chef. And when Relæ closed for good in December 2020, Tam decided to launch his own restaurant, JATAK. The journey since then, however, has been anything but smooth. When I sat down with him recently, he still wasn't sure when he'd be able to open. But I began by asking him what it was like working at Relæ and how he felt when it closed.
I loved it, and I had such great creative freedom. So even after 10 years, I was really happy there. But then I couldn't really see myself for years being at anywhere else, other than just doing my own thing. Getting to close Relæ on our terms, it was, the obvious thing was to do my own restaurant. And I needed some time to just to gather myself, because, it was 10 years. It was a huge part of me. So actually, it was very fortunate to get to have freedom and time and really be able to dive into the process. I think as a young cook, you always imagine what your restaurant would be like, how big the kitchen is, and what are all these things it has to have. But you'll be lucky to have something that maybe even hits 50% of those dreams. And that's just what the process was like. And we were lucky to find this small space that even in the time of the pandemic, even if it was the worst of worst scenario, there was things that we thought if we had to pivot, we could do it on our own. And that was the main thing. I wanted a project where I see myself in it every day, that it was completely in my control, and I can have my hands with my partner Sarah to shape it into what we felt was right.
Jonathan, tell me what your experience of opening a restaurant has been so far.
It's been quite the ride. It's been a long process, and with it, it's filled with great moments of getting to be really creative and really happy. But then at the same time, of course, lots of challenges come. So it's really a little bit of a roller coaster. And I think having it be in this period where we're still kind of in the pandemic makes it even more kind of a challenge. I think a big thing right now is just the supply chain. For example, just acoustic ceilings. We were talking about it for months and everything was lined up nicely, and then all of a sudden it became like an 8-week waiting time, and it was the same things with wood. And we've been trying to have this custom grill being made in Atlanta, and they were going through a steel shortage. So we thought we were just going to open the restaurant without it, but somehow things came through and that just arrived. So it's just dealing with those things all the time, and it's things you can't really control. So we just have to kind of take it on the chin.
How do you feel? I mean, it must be pretty frustrating.
It is, but I'm a pretty patient person, but it's definitely getting to a point where we just can't wait to open. So we're trying to utilize this extra time and be more creative or work a bit closer with the team to develop things and kind of focus on the finer details. So it's great with the time, but there's still so much to do that it seems like more time is also a good thing. So I think they're just trying to stay positive. I think that's what you have to do in these projects.
What do you know now that you wish you'd known when you first started to launch a restaurant?
I think the main thing is like really like pause and take your time, and with all these challenges, really look into it before you say go. Because I think us chefs, we're always like, we want things done fast. We want to go like full on into whatever challenge we face. And I think it's important to have that. But I think with starting a business, going into unknown territory, really learn about everything. And then you pull the trigger and go with every element, whether it's understanding plumbing or electrical or learning about how to write a employment contract properly. Everything, just like you're in control. So make the time, like give yourself time to really analyze and think it all the way, and then really attack it.
This is a work in progress. Speaking of plumbing and electricals, we decided to leave the cafe and cycle up the road to see how the build-out of JATAK was going.
Do we have power?
This phone now.
Those have power? Yeah, we have power. Oh my God, we have power.
With the lights finally on, I asked Jonathan what he was hoping to do to ensure that JATAK is a healthy and happy place to work in.
Oh, well, that's super important, because I have a family. I have a 10-year-old daughter, and you don't really hear chefs, get to be at like ambitious restaurants or high pressure environments and get to do that, like a lot of chefs have to either give up cooking or go into some other way to relate with food. And I was fortunate, thanks to how things were set up at Relæ, that I was able to cook at a restaurant while, having a family for 10 years. So that is super important, that I create a space that my staff can do that. We want to find ways that, our staff works better hours, works less hours, can have time outside of the restaurant. So we're really trying to go into this and find ways to make it be a good workplace, because that's what the whole industry needs. And we were taught that at Relæ. We opened being only working 4 days. Chefs got to have a rotation of having 4 days off, including weekends, and we would always sit down and eat staff food together. We would get wine with our meals on the weekend, and really there are like restaurants now, even high caliber, where the cooks are eating while they're prepping, or they're sitting on some milk crate and that's their break, and then they get back into it, and it ends up being 14, 16-hour days. So we were really well treated at Relæ, and I want to continue that here and see if we can make it better, because the pandemic has made people realize how tough of a daily life it is. When I have my own place, if I don't consider that, I think that would be irresponsible.
Of course, the question is, how do you make the sums work? Restaurants that want to do 3 or 4 days a week open, they still also have to, bring in revenue. I mean, was that something you learned from Relæ, how to balance the competing interests of providing time off and good staff hours, but also making enough money to keep the lights on?
You need to have really talented people. You need to think outside the box so that we could have a smaller team, but maybe people that, do a little bit of everything, that want to learn about wine. So we could have chefs presenting wine and pouring wine. And if we all work together, we could be more efficient. And then that's how you can start cutting down hours, And then if you're really efficient, we can start R&Ding at the start of the week together. We could all sit down. We could really plan the week while, in the restaurants, you're like finding 5 minutes at 11:30 at night to have a meeting and discuss these big decisions for tomorrow and plan a menu or make these changes, and you're already there 15, 16 hours. Like, your mind is not clear about it. So can that work? And then what if it ends up being because we get a bulk of our stuff done at the beginning of the week, or we just do the things that make sense? Because if I get really high quality fish at the beginning of the week and we purposely age it and use techniques so we don't have to do it every day, kind of things like that, it maybe ends up we get our staff getting more sleep at night because we can start later because we planned and organized and structured. So there is ways to do it, and I think restaurants always think in order to be more efficient, we just need to have more people doing stuff at the same time for a longer time, or people have to stay longer or come earlier. No, there's other industries that has figured it out. So why can't we?
If Denmark has to go into another lockdown and you're open, do you know what your response will be already or not?
You know what? I was one of the fortunate ones that didn't have to go through that this year, like Relæ closed and I was just focused working on with Sarah developing this project. I even got to go to Stone Barns and get like a life-changing learning experience. So yeah, I'm going to have to talk with my friends and hear how they handled it. But I have a great team. I think people are excited for what we do. So if we pivot, I'm sure we'll come up with something fun to kind of get things rolling.
You could call it JATAK away.
Oh, wow. Oh, man. Thank you. I might have to use that one.
You're very welcome.
JATAK away. Wow. I almost have to open a stall down the street and just do that now, because that's just gold. That's pure gold, man.
That was Jonathan Tam of restaurant JATAK, which is slated to open soon, hopefully. Now our next guest is Peter Altenburg, who for many years ran a cocktail bar in the very space that's slowly but surely becoming JATAK. Altenburg decided to close that bar in 2019 and start afresh with Bird, a cocktail bar in the more upscale neighborhood of Frederiksberg. Bird takes its name from the jazz musician Charlie Parker and its inspiration from old-fashioned bars in Japan, known as kissa, where patrons gather to listen to old jazz records in a group setting. I paid a flying visit to Bird recently, and after Peter had mixed me a cocktail,
The French 75.
I asked him why he'd called time on his previous bar.
A lot of people didn't really understand what it was all about. Having a group of 8 people coming in 12 in the evening, super smashed by drinking a lot of beers just around the corner. Maybe they were not looking for that, but they heard that we did great cocktails. So they came in, and then I think that they just kind of spoiled the evening, not only for themselves there, but also for all other guests, because they were not rowdy or anything, but it's just like, this is weird. This is not what we're looking for. The thing that we're going to do here is so very different, at least in atmosphere, not necessarily behind the bar.
So in other words, you can pick a location, but the location could change around.
Exactly. When enough is enough, you just know it. And I was like, no more. I want out. It was probably the best decision I did just before Corona.
Why this location? How did you narrow it down to this?
I had 3 spots in the city, and they were all super nice. But when I first saw this, then I was like, well, it can't be anything else. When I first walked in the room, and it was a ladies' clothes store before, I just felt like this is magic. It really felt the way that I want it, and I could really see all my ideas for designing the place straight on. I was never in doubt. This really felt like this is going to be the place.
Okay, Peter, so tell me about Bird. What's the idea behind it?
Copenhagen has for quite a while now been missing a place where we take everything that you do behind the bar very serious, and then on the atmosphere and music side as well, is something that we think has been neglected for a very long time. You can find super spots where you get great music, and you can find awesome bars where you have a great playlist, but that doesn't necessarily fit the whole scheme of the night. I think tying those two ends together was what we really wanted with Bird. We didn't want to be just another cocktail bar. We don't want to be one of those cocktail bars that is so up their own and forget about what is most important, and that is definitely our guests. My first inspiration was from a jazz kisser, is what it's called in Japan. But I think doing a jazz kisser without doing coffee and be there as your own DJ all day, and just having that one venue where people come down to listen to your music and just relax, is not something that will pay my bills. So what we do is that we operate with a guy that takes care of all our music. He actually curates all our records, and he takes care of all the bookings, and make sure that the people that are invited to play here are in line with our musical manifest, which is that people need to have something on their mind and on heart to be able to play here. And we want music lovers more than people that are great at partying. Music has been so neglected, like the experience of putting on a record. I mean, when did you last do that? Instead of just going to Spotify and play something from a playlist. It's so convenient. But having that moment of just be yourself together with that record and a cup of coffee or a good drink, you never or rarely do that. And I think also then when we come to the weekends or Thursdays and Saturdays where the DJs are playing right now, everything is curated. So they actually do that because this is what I feel is really, really good music. And you can just feel it. You can just feel that this is from something that, or someone that has something on their heart. That was the idea that I think that no one were doing right now.
Are you doing anything different in terms of how you run the bar that you didn't do when you first started out in the industry?
Well, the first major thing from the very beginning is obviously that our guests, they know alcohol now. When we opened, they had no fucking clue, sorry, but they didn't. They thought alcohol or great drinks were strawberry daiquiris and mojitos and stuff like that. But then we came to a period where everything was about how crafted we can be. And I think that was probably one of the worst periods of going out, especially in cocktail bars. It was dreadful to see so many bartenders just being about themselves and about our concept and all that. So I think the cocktail industry is right now, or the way I see it internationally at least, is that it's all about the guests. And that's the major change. I think for us in particular, it's been the change from à la minute cocktails, where you do everything on order, more or less, till now, where we do almost everything pre-service. So we take a glass, put in an ice cube, we pour over our alcohol, and we garnish and we serve. I've always been a great fan of those 10-second cocktails, which was like a huge thing back in 80s and 90s. The cocktails were dreadful and not very interesting, though. I think the idea of spending more time with the guests instead of being so deep into orders when you stand behind the bar is just not... Well, why not? I don't even think it's cheating. I think it's improving every aspect of your business if you batch. The more you can batch, the better it is. We do all our drinks pre-service. We batch pretty much everything. You can still come in, order whiskey sour, get it on regular lemon juice and stuff. But we want to do a drinking experience that is closer to when you just have a glass of wine. We also want to do something that is not necessarily upscale, but people went to Guild to get that drinking experience that you could maybe, put next to the Michelin restaurant experience, which I think is crazy. Because, well, we spend a lot of hours pre-service in making drinks, but it has nothing to do with what chefs do. We still nerd a lot about the drinks, obviously, but the drinking experience should just be a little bit less complicated, I think.
That was Peter Altenburg of the Copenhagen cocktail bar Bird. And from Japanese jazz bars to Japanese punk bands now. You see, it's long been something of a cliche to describe chefs as the new rock stars and cooking as the new rock and roll. But for my next guest, the parallel isn't entirely unwarranted. Anne Lee is the founder and CEO of the Core Restaurant Group in Norway, which has launched 14 ventures in the past 6 years and currently operates 4 restaurants in Oslo. including La Mayor, an upscale Mexican eatery that opened in August. To understand how she got there, though, you first have to go back about 20 years to this. That's a track called Heart Attack by Mika Bomb, a Japanese punk band from London who were briefly on the Beastie Boys record label. And that's Anne on the guitar. She later joined the Norwegian shoegaze band Serena Manish, for whom she played organ and provided backing vocals. And it was around then that she first realised food might well be the new rock and roll, quite literally. I called Anne in Oslo shortly after the launch of La Mayor and began by asking her why she swapped shredding guitars for shredding vegetables.
One of my bandmates is a chef. And so whenever we were not on tour, I needed work and I loved cooking. And so I started to work kind of as an apprentice in kitchens with him. I just fell in love with it. I was actually had my own catering company and I was working in a restaurant at the same time. So I had this insane, typical chef lifestyle. It was easy to get burnt out. It was not actually too dissimilar from the rock and roll lifestyle, you could say.
That's a very good way of putting it. And as I understand it, you eventually decided to leave the music industry, though, and go into the world of tech and startups. How did that happen?
I studied for about a year to try to get into a business school. And so I went back to the States, North Carolina, and I studied for a couple of years and got my MBA. In business school, the things I was most attracted to were startups and the lean startup mentality. And then I wanted to just try my luck in San Francisco around Silicon Valley. And I specialize again in sort of nerdy project management stuff. At the same time, I lived just outside Outer Mission. So I was on Mission Street all the time. I loved the food culture. San Francisco is still one of my favorite cities in the world. I had been long distance dating my Norwegian husband for about a year. Since I didn't have any luck getting a kind of the dream tech job, I decided to try to move to Oslo, be with him, and see if I could get a job in tech in Oslo. I interviewed with all the big four and did that whole thing. But I think as an immigrant, it's really hard when you don't have the language aspect. So my friend, he had a bar and he said, "Hey, we have a kitchen. Do you want to do something?" So that's how Mission Taco started. It's kind of a hole-in-the-wall little taco venture. Again, I had sworn that I wouldn't go back to the chef world. I wouldn't go back to Norway. And I ended up doing both those things.
And you talked about having a lean startup mentality when you graduated with your MBA and then worked in the tech world. So to what extent would you say you've had that move fast and break things kind of approach?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about it. I mean, the thing is with startups, a lot of people think that if we go into a risky venture, that's all about being able to bear as much risk as possible. But actually, it's the opposite. When you know you're going into a risky industry, what you're trying to do is create all these ways to protect yourself from all this risk. I guess being in the restaurants themselves is giving you that sort of insight to it. So for sure, we have a lean startup mentality to opening restaurants. Every time we are opening a venture, we like to think that we have acquired a certain amount of knowledge of how to do it better. And there's one more thing to protect ourselves against that we can try to prevent from happening. But what's so interesting about this industry is that there's always a world of things that can make or break your restaurant. And I've experienced them all, like whether it's a bad location to maybe bad leadership or bad management to just Corona. Corona is one that we never could have predicted.
Absolutely not, no. Now, tell me, after 6 years in the industry, what are some of the biggest learnings you've had to apply, no matter what gets thrown at you?
It's not too dissimilar from what I'd say a lot of, again, lean startups and businesses say, which is to try to minimize debt. There was the same concept with Mission Taco. I used my savings to invest into a very small thing, and I grew kind of organically. And the money we made out of that, we invested into way down south and so on and so forth. So we've never taken on a huge amount of debt. Of course, everything when it comes to Corona, you kind of have to separate. But at least in the first 5 years, we've managed it really well by using this sort of lean startup that we open right away. We get a small amount of growth, but we get cash coming in.
Okay, so now tell me about your latest restaurant, La Mayor. Can you describe the cuisine, the idea behind it?
The brief was really, how can we elevate Mexican food in the market and environment we're in? I had this idea of using Norwegian produce, mainly seafood that we have around, like also a lot of seafood that Norwegians don't eat, like octopus, different things that Norwegians aren't accustomed to, but very good quality from small producers that are excellent, and cooking them with a sort of Norwegian heart.
So now can you tell me how La Mayor typifies the lean startup mentality?
La Mayor is still opened in a very core style, even though we've had extreme delays through COVID. And that is, we don't have money to have 6 months to a year of test kitchening or a huge team to perfect dishes before we open. We really are building the restaurant in as lean way as we can. And then we do mostly everything ourselves. And then we just open. Of course, we cook for some weeks and we're testing, but there's a lot of test kitchening on the fly while customers come in. So the plus side of that is that you have cash coming straight away, starting to pay down the small amount of debt that you've invested into it. But the most successful restaurants I've had all have paid down the debt within the first year. In 2019, all my restaurants were profitable, which we've been very, very fortunate about. But I think it's, again, because we started to grow very organically and not had huge amounts of debt and investment in the beginning. We're too impatient. We want to break even the first year and start making money after that. The downside of that is, in the beginning, you'll get a lot of negative comments on the food, and that you have to bear with. And that's what we call the feedback iteration loop. You get people complaining, oh, this was too this, you should have done that, you should tweak the plating of this. But we like that. And we have meetings like we are now in this early phase about the food every single morning. We talk about each dish. We talk about the feedback of the customers from the day before. This is really important and part of our growth process.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Now tell me, what's it like trying to open restaurants in Oslo? What kind of restaurant scene is it?
I feel like Oslo still has a ways to go. There's a lot of reasons why it's not as developed, but I think one of them has to do with these property developers and the really high barriers to entry in this market. It's extremely high taxation. There's just so much regulation in this market that I don't recommend people without experience go into it. People even with experience go in and fail. I mean, if you look at the failure rate of the 14 places that failure meaning having to close down within 1 or 2 years, that's kind of the classic success rate. Like, many restaurants don't survive past 2 years, basically. It's a really challenging place to open a restaurant.
Now, in the 6 years you've been running restaurants, you've had various challenges thrown at you. But what's different this time in terms of trying to start a restaurant and then actually launching it?
Well, obviously, it's really made those who want to do this, I guess, stick around or not. So I think this has been a big issue around the world for a good reason, though. I mean, we've been joking that chefs are like, oh, the color is coming back to my face. I'm actually the weight I should be. I can have time with my partner. On the other hand, there have been those, maybe like myself, who see opportunity. And there's been a lot of people who are like, well, now I really have a choice. Either I can quit this, because if there's a better time to quit, it would be during COVID, because COVID really just kind of destroyed everything. So one, either you start all over from scratch doing something else, or you start all over from scratch doing what you were doing, but trying to do it better. And I guess that's kind of where we're at. Still don't know if that's the right decision, but in a way, you have to try. It's our living. We wouldn't go down without a fight.
It sounds like it causes so many headaches and so much hard work. So why keep doing it?
I know. I ask myself that every day. No, it's first the people, obviously, that you're very close with, that you love. And that's a cliche answer, but you're in this boat, really. together with people. And, they use the word family a lot in this industry, and it's not too dissimilar. You hate them, but you can't live without them. And then there's also just maybe that this is the most challenging thing, and things seem so impossible so often. And that in itself, if you're a bit crazy, motivates and incentivizes you to try to do something that no one else has done and create something really beautiful. I kind of imagine in the future when everything is replaced by AI and we have robots doing all these different kind of jobs, I wonder if that experience of going to the diner and having that waiter who knows your name and what your favorite foods are, the sort of social aspect of the memories you have of eating a meal with somebody, I don't think that's ever going to go away, or I hope it doesn't.
That was Anne Lee, the CEO of the Core Restaurant Group in Oslo. And if you want to hear more about Anne's journey from Japanese punk to running restaurants in Oslo, then head over to Superb's website, where you'll find a truly inspiring profile of her, the second in our new web series, The Specials. And our final guest today has had quite the career so far too. Klaus Henriksen was born in Jutland and spent years working in top-tier restaurants such as Noma and Søllerød Kro before being appointed head chef at Dragsholm Slot in 2007. Under his leadership, the restaurant won a Michelin star in 2017. But in late 2020, Henriksen left Dragsholm Slot and soon started making plans to launch his own restaurant, Motor. Alas, it wasn't plain sailing for him either. The idea had been to open Motor in May, but a cruel twist of fate meant the launch had to be postponed to November. To find out why, I jumped in my own Motor and made the hour-long trip from Copenhagen to visit Klaus in the leafy grounds of the Anneberg Cultural Park in northern New Zealand. Hi. After he gave me a tour of the building, which, it turns out, used to be a state psychiatric hospital. Have you ever seen the movie Shutter Island?
Yes, I have seen it.
We sat down in his office, and I began by asking him why his time at Dragsholm Slot came to an end.
I think we wanted to go two different ways. And for me, I wanted to go the more natural way. I want to use the things for me that lie closest to my heart. It's not because I don't want to do 1 star, 2 star, or 3 stars. I just simply think that we wanted to go and do the stars in two different ways. I think they want to do a lot of more classic things. It's going to be more truffles. It's going to be more caviar. And for me, it's very simple. There's no personality in it. It's easy to cook with those things. I want to cook with vegetables where it's going to be tough. I want to use different kinds of shellfish and fish. For me, it's a much tougher job. I wanted the challenge to do the other things and went to go the other way. Shaving truffles over a beautiful piece of meat is very nice. I love it. But I want to create something that gives where the personality can be asparagus. It can be a beet. It can be all those things. If you can create something out of that, there's a lot. It's a lot more tough job to get those things to work. There's more possibilities in the world of vegetables. There's a lot more complexity. And it's not easy. It's very tough. It's very time-consuming to do vegetables. And for me also, I just think it's so beautiful. Having, simply just a beautiful carrot, and it doesn't need to look the same. It doesn't matter. It's beautiful on its own. It can have different colors, flavors. It can have another crunch. You can cook it, you can ferment it, you can make an ice cream out of it. So there's a lot of different things where if you have a piece of meat, you can serve it raw, you can fry it, and for me, it's basically it.
When you left Dragsholm Slot, what were you thinking you were going to do next? Was there a period of reflection where you didn't know, or were you quite quick to decide, okay, I'm going to go and do my own restaurant?
When I stopped, it was very tough, Everybody knows that Corona just closed the restaurants from one day to another. For me, it was a very big disappointment because I created my last month, ending up with a new year and all these things. And of course, we couldn't do that. From one day to another, within 2 hours, they just closed your entire life in 13 years. We cleaned and we made it up. And for me, the restaurant, the house was done. and I had to give it on to somebody else. And I just needed to be myself. I didn't really want to make a big restaurant. If I should make a restaurant, I want to do a small one. I could also just do some different events. And then they called in the end of December and asked me if I wanted to come up here. And I said, no, I really did not want to go. But I said, okay, I want to come and take a look at it. And they showed me around, and they showed me all these things, and I fell in love with it because for me, it's also the silence, it's the natural, it's you can hear the birds outside the windows. And then I thought, I actually never met a person that was so crazy that they wanted to go into an old psychiatric hospital and try to create a restaurant. It could only be a stupid person. Okay, that's going to be me. I'm going to fucking do that. And we simply just started up. It was the start of February, middle February.
So the plan was to open Restaurant Motor in the spring, but that's not what happened.
No, the plan was that we were going to open Motor in the middle of May. And we were having these meetings every Wednesday morning to find out who's going to do what and what was going on. And then one day I came out here and I just got the call that you have to go home. Something's wrong. We have to go to the doctor. And said, what are you talking about? And I went home, and my wife was crying, and she was just she said, what's going on? And we went to the doctors, and they found out she had cancer. I would just see her hopes, her eyes, her dreams, just collapse. And I needed to find out exactly what was going to happen, because we were standing with this whole new project. We were on the way and everything was going according to plan. And then, you're just like, oh. I was just thinking how I was going to open a restaurant with 2 kids and no wife. I was thinking very much of her. She was just lying, on the couch. She couldn't say anything. She wouldn't eat anything. She was just like, somebody was just looking out the room. And of course, because she thought she got the death sentence. So I had the kids and I was home and we started taking all these tests. And then they called me up and said, shouldn't we just close the whole project? I said, no, let's go. I could feel like I had to go out instead of being at home. And everything was sad for me because I needed to go out and also just have a little bit time of my own and come back to be a better father, to be a better husband. Simply just for reflecting and coming out in the world. So they called me up and said if it was okay, they would do a pop-up restaurant and I could come and go as I wanted. And I said, yes, of course. And we started the whole treatment every 14 days with chemo. And I was very lucky. Everybody in my family really supported us and came and helped. And of course, as everybody knows, it's a very big problem getting cooks and waiters. So like everybody else, I had to be here every day while the restaurant was open, almost. And I'm so happy for all the people that helped me during the whole summertime, the waiters, everybody. So the project slightly just started, and I just felt like, how are you gonna live out your dream with this with this thing? And then but we had to talk a lot about these things. And I asked her, so when do you think? They asked me, should we open Motor this year? She said, I'm done with my chemo in the end of October, and it's Christmas. There's a lot of people coming for Christmas. You need to open this year. So she actually decided when we were going to open. She's not going to be a part of it, but she's always in my heart, my thoughts, and so she decided the opening date. She decided all these things because for her it was also like. She said, it's like I'm crushing your dream. And I said, no, you're really not, because this is much more important right now. And we've done chemo. We're going to open in 7 days. And I actually don't know how I'm feeling about it. It sounds very strange, but for me, the whole year, as we decided that the whole year was shit, but it can only go up. We're in the bottom and we can only go up.
We paused the interview at this point for fairly obvious reasons. And when we picked it up again, I asked Klaus what his team had learned from the summer pop-up.
It allowed us to being able to be in the kitchen, to find out how is it working? Should we rebuild something? Have we done some measures wrong? But we also was allowed to, to see the routines, to see how are the guests responding being here. Because there's never been a restaurant here, there's never been anything else. And I didn't want to create what you could get all the other restaurants out here. I want to create something on my own. And it allowed us to create some very funny things.
So having done the pop-up, do you know what kind of restaurant it's going to be?
People that knows me also know that I have to say no. It's gonna be a restaurant where you're gonna come and you're gonna experience some ideas and a thought of cooking. It needs to be an experience. I'm not gonna serve 5 courses where all of them are gonna be the best courses in your life. I'm gonna serve dishes that I never thought about this. And there's also gonna be something that's recognizable. I want to create something where you feel at home. The whole idea is that you're gonna feel at home, like you're sitting with somebody else. A dinner with a lot of vegetables, fish and shellfish, and if we need it, we're gonna add meat, but it's gonna be up to my providers that what it is gonna be. It's gonna be that if there comes a fisherman that caught 3 lobsters, I'm gonna serve 3 lobsters for 3 tables, but then the rest is gonna get turbot instead, or it's gonna get squid. And most of all, we need to have fun. If we don't have fun, it doesn't matter for me.
What do you wish you'd known a year ago? That you know now about the industry, about opening a restaurant, about yourself?
It's a very good question. Next time, if I'm going to open something, I'm going to start two years in advance. It takes so long. Being a cook is very simple. Peel a potato, I cook it. It's done. I serve it. You build a restaurant, you get an idea, then you draw it, then you send it somewhere, then you discuss it, then you send it back, then you discuss it, then there's a new idea. All these things constantly. And I think that's what takes it the long journey to create a restaurant. But I also think it's very necessary to have all those different questions. And are you sure this is the right way of doing it? And is this what you want? Is this really what you need for these things? And I think that's probably one of the most things. But I knew it, but I was just like, it doesn't matter. It takes 1 week to do this. It only takes a week. But it took 7 months.
My very last question, how are you feeling?
For me, it feels like coming home to something new. And I'm very much looking forward to start being able to write this kind of story on my own. It's the first time I tried it like this. It's, the feeling of something ending. Because now this time I took the chair, there's me who decided when we were going to end. And we decided when we we're going to open. And for me, I hope that's gonna be the final journey of something of a new, or the beginning of a beautiful new fairy tale.
That was Klaus Henriksen of restaurant Motor, which opened in November. And there you have it, 4 different takes on starting a restaurant right now. And the red thread connecting them all lies, I think, in what Klaus said about the final journey of one thing and the beginning of another. It reminds me of what the poet T.S. Eliot once wrote: what we call the beginning is often the end, and to make an end is to make a beginning. The end is where we start from. I think the end of something is where all 4 of the guests in this episode began their latest venture. All 4 have closed the chapter on one project and begun another. All 4 have drawn from hard-won experience and summoned the courage to walk to the edge of the cliff and leap into the unknown. And all 4 have embarked on a new project and, in a way, used what they were doing before as a point of departure. In the next episode of The Recipe, we'll explore another point of departure and talk to 3 restaurateurs about how they decided what kind of food they were going to serve. We'll meet an Australian management consultant who missed Melbourne brunches so much he decided to launch his own restaurant.
It was kind of an obvious thing for me that there's this thing that I used to do and love, and I can't do that here in the same way, and maybe there's something there.
And a sometime web developer giving Copenhagen's best pizzerias a run for their money.
We would like to try to do something just a tad differently without trying to invent the new pizza, because, it's hard changing perfect.
We'll also resume our conversation with Jonathan Tam and find out what he'll be cooking at JATAK.
To kind of put words on kind of summing up the cuisine, I still can't do that. And I think that's exciting.
But all that's to come on the next episode of The Recipe. This episode was produced and hosted by me, James Clasper, for Superb. You can find all the show notes, including a full transcript, on our website, superbexperience.com. Many thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.